You wake up one morning and your body feels wrong, heavy, drained, like something invisible has been feeding on you all night. You look in the mirror and see exhaustion carved into your face, but you can't remember why. This isn't depression. This isn't burnout. This is something Carl Jung spent decades documenting in his clinical practice. Something he called the empaths, slow death. And here's the part that should terrify you. Most empaths don't realize they're dying until it's almost too late. Today, I'm going to show you how empaths heal themselves by unlocking what Jung called the awakened empath. Because the secret isn't what you think. It's not about protecting your energy or setting better boundaries. It's about something far more dangerous and far more powerful. Jung's private case files reveal a pattern that stunned him. Patient after patient arrived at his clinic with the same symptoms. Chronic fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. A hollow feeling in the chest, like something vital had been carved out. The sensation of being a ghost in their own life. These weren't random cases. These were empaths who had given so much of themselves that they'd forgotten how to be whole. But here's what made Jung's hands shake as he wrote his notes. These empaths weren't just tired. They had become what he called emotional black holes, unconsciously absorbing everyone else's pain, rage, and despair while giving away their own life force. They were dying from the inside out, and they didn't even know it. Jung called this condition undifferentiated perception, and he realized it was killing people slowly and invisibly. The empath walks into a room and instantly feels the weight of everyone's hidden suffering, the mother's quiet desperation, the father's buried rage, the siblings' unspoken jealousy. Most people have walls that filter this information. Empaths have open wounds. Every emotion in the room pours into them like water, into a sinking ship. And here's the truly disturbing part. They've been doing this since childhood. Their brains are wired differently, processing emotional information at levels that would overwhelm normal people. Jung discovered that empaths don't choose to absorb others' emotions. Their nervous systems are built for what he called participation mystique, the unconscious merging with everything around them. They can't turn it off any more than you can choose not to hear a scream. But society teaches them to treat this gift like a disease. Every time they try to voice what they sense, people call them too sensitive or overly emotional, so they learn to stay silent, to doubt their perceptions, to carry everyone's darkness without complaint. And that silence is killing them. Let's examine a narrative illustration based on patterns Jung observed repeatedly across his practice. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of a woman in her late 20s who looked decades older than her years. This composite example represents what Jung documented time and again. Her body was shutting down from years of absorbing her family's dysfunction. An alcoholic father whose rage she absorbed nightly. A depressed mother whose despair she carried like a second skin. Siblings who used her as an emotional dumping ground whenever their lives fell apart. She had become a human sponge for everyone's misery, and it was destroying her one cell at a time. But here's what made Jung realize he wasn't treating a sick person. He was treating someone with an extraordinary gift that had been turned into a weapon against her. When Jung asked patients fitting this profile to describe the people in their lives, he expected confused rambling. What he got instead changed everything he thought he knew about empaths. In case after case showing this pattern, these individuals didn't just feel people's emotions. They understood them with surgical precision. They could describe their father's childhood trauma just by watching his micro-expressions. They could predict their mother's depressive episodes weeks before they happened. They had mapped every person's psychological patterns with an accuracy that terrified Jung. They had never used this knowledge, not once, because they'd been taught that seeing clearly was a sin, that knowing too much made them dangerous. So they'd spent their lives pretending to be blind while their gift slowly poisoned them. Jung realized he was sitting across from dormant warriors, people with the power to see through every lie, every manipulation, every hidden agenda. But those warriors had been asleep for so long they'd forgotten they existed. Traditional advice for empaths is useless. Set boundaries, they say. Practice self-care. Learn to say no. Jung tried all of it with his empath patients. None of it worked. Not because the advice was wrong, but because it missed the fundamental problem. You can't set boundaries when your entire nervous system is designed to merge with others. You can't practice self-care when you don't know where you end and other people begin. You can't say no when your identity is built on being the person who always says yes. Jung discovered that telling an empath to set boundaries is like telling someone to stop breathing. Their entire psychological structure is organized around absorbing and processing others' emotional content. This isn't a bad habit they need to break. This is their core operating system. And here's the part that kept Jung awake at night. The traditional advice fails because it treats empaths like broken normal people who need to become more normal. But empaths aren't broken normal people. They're a completely different species of consciousness that society doesn't understand and can't accommodate. The real problem isn't that empaths feel too much. The real problem is that they've been conditioned to believe their perceptions are wrong. They see manipulation and get told they're imagining things. They feel someone's hidden rage and get told they're being paranoid. They sense dysfunction and get told empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. They're creating drama. This creates what Jung called the empath's curse. You're given extraordinary perception, but punished every time you use it. So you learn to gaslight yourself, to deny what you see, to apologize for existing. And that self-betrayal is the real poison. Jung observed something disturbing across his empath cases. The healing didn't start with meditation or boundaries or positive affirmations. It started with massive betrayal. Almost every empath who transformed in Jung's care had first been utterly destroyed by someone they'd trusted completely. A spouse's infidelity discovered after years of suspecting but denying. A parent's cruelty finally exposed after decades of making excuses. A friend's manipulation revealed after endless forgiveness. The betrayal wasn't the tragedy. The betrayal was the medicine. Because here's what Jung realized. Empaths can ignore their own suffering forever. They're built to endure. But they can't ignore undeniable proof that their perceptions were right all along. When the evidence becomes overwhelming, when the lies finally collapse, something inside the empath cracks open. Jung called this the clarity event, the moment when the fog lifts and they see with absolute precision exactly how they've been used. Most people would expect empaths to break down at this point, to cry, to rage, to fall apart. Their betrayers expected that too. They were prepared for emotional chaos they could manipulate. What happened instead was something nobody saw coming. The empaths became unnaturally calm. They stopped defending themselves. They stopped explaining. They stopped trying to make anyone understand. Because they'd finally stopped needing anyone to validate what they could see clearly. Jung described it as the moment the sleeping warrior opens her eyes. And when that warrior wakes up, everything changes. Here's where Jung's research becomes truly dangerous. To heal, the empath must do something that society has spent their entire life teaching them is evil. They must find their inner monster. Not metaphorically, literally. The empath must locate their capacity for coldness, for cruelty, for selfishness. They must integrate what Jung called the shadow, the parts of themselves they've been taught to destroy. This isn't about becoming a bad person. This is about becoming a complete person. Jung observed that empaths who stay broken are empaths who believe they must be harmless to be good. They equate kindness with weakness, compassion with doormat behavior, gentleness with victimhood, and that equation is killing them. Because being harmless isn't a virtue. Being dangerous but controlled is the goal. Jung watched his empath patients discover something that shocked them. They weren't weak. They'd been collecting data on their abusers for years. Every manipulation tactic, every emotional trigger, every psychological weakness. They knew exactly how to destroy the people who'd hurt them. They just hadn't realized they possessed this knowledge because they'd never imagined using it. This is what Jung called the strategist's war room. The empath's mind isn't a victim's diary. It's a weapons cache they've been unconsciously building their entire lives. And the moment they realize this, everything shifts. They understand they've been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. They see that their so-called weakness was actually restrained power. They recognize that they weren't broken by abuse, they were studying it, and now they know the game better than anyone. This realization doesn't make them cruel, it makes them sovereign. They're no longer people things happen to. They're architects of their own reality. The transformation Jung documented wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous. One moment the empath is drowning in everyone else's darkness. The next moment they're standing on shore, watching others drown in theirs. Jung called this shift individuation, the process of becoming a complete self, rather than a fragment that exists to serve others. And the first sign of individuation is the ability to observe without absorbing. Consider how this manifests in practice. The healed empath walks into the same room that used to destroy them. They feel the mother's desperation, the father's rage, the siblings' jealousy. But now, instead of absorbing these emotions, they simply witness them. They see the patterns. They understand the dynamics. They feel compassion for the suffering. But none of it lives in their body anymore. Jung called this the mirror effect. The awakened empath becomes a reflective surface that shows people their own darkness without saying a word. And here's what makes this so powerful. When you stop absorbing people's shadow content, they're forced to carry it themselves. The alcoholic father can't use his daughter as an emotional dumping ground anymore. The depressed mother can't siphon energy from her son. The manipulative friend can't feed on their empath's constant validation. And without the empath playing their assigned role, the entire dysfunctional system collapses. This is why families and groups react with rage when an empath transforms. They haven't lost a loved one. They've lost their psychological waste disposal system. But the transformed empath doesn't engage with that rage. They just watch it from a distance, curious, unmoved, finally free. After the clarity event, almost every empath Jung studied entered what he called the hermit phase. They withdrew from everyone, not in depression or defeat, but in recognition that they needed space away from other people's psychological noise to remember who they actually were. This withdrawal terrified the people around them. Family members accused them of being selfish. Friends claimed they'd changed for the worse. Partners threatened abandonment if they didn't return to their old accommodating selves. But the empaths didn't care. For the first time in their lives, they chose themselves. They chose silence over chaos. They chose solitude over dysfunction. They chose their own healing over everyone else's comfort. And in that solitude, something extraordinary happened. Jung observed that empaths in their hermit phase weren't isolating, they were forging. Like metal in a kiln, the intense heat of solitude burned away everything that wasn't essential, everything they'd absorbed from others, every false identity built on being useful. What emerged from that fire was someone completely new, someone who looked the same, but operated from an entirely different psychological foundation. Someone who'd learned the most dangerous lesson Jung could teach. You don't owe anyone access to your energy. This wasn't selfishness. This was what Jung called selective empathy. The awakened empath still feels everything. They still see clearly. They still have the capacity for deep compassion. But now they choose where that compassion flows. They give their energy to people who deserve it and withhold it from people who would waste it. This is the power move that changes everything. Because when you make your empathy selective rather than automatic, you stop being a resource anyone can exploit. You become a conscious force that enhances life where you choose to direct it. You're no longer a battery everyone can plug into. You're a spotlight that illuminates what you decide deserves light. Here's what Jung discovered that sounds impossible, but proves true in case after case. When the awakened empath finally returns to the world, predators can sense it immediately. The manipulators who used to target them suddenly avoid eye contact. The energy vampires who used to drain them find excuses to leave the room. The narcissists who used to dominate them become strangely quiet in their presence. This isn't imagination. This is what Jung called the predator's instinct. Predatory people are attracted to unawakened empaths like sharks to blood in water. They can smell the lack of boundaries, the desperate need to please, the willingness to absorb abuse in exchange for crumbs of approval. But awakened empaths emit a completely different frequency. They radiate something that makes predators deeply uncomfortable. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition. The predator senses that their usual tactics won't work, that this person sees through their mask. That engaging would be more trouble than it's worth. And here's the beautiful part. The awakened empath doesn't have to do anything to create this effect. They don't have to be aggressive or confrontational. Their mere presence is enough. Because they've integrated their shadow, they know their own capacity for darkness, and that knowledge makes them immune to manipulation. You can't guilt-trip someone who's made peace with their selfishness. You can't gaslight someone who trusts their perceptions absolutely. You can't manipulate someone who's already seen every game you could possibly play. The awakened empath has become what Jung called a psychological architect, someone who can read, influence, and shape human systems with supernatural precision, not through cruelty or domination, but through complete consciousness of how psychology actually works. Jung had a theory about empaths that he rarely spoke about publicly. He believed they were being deliberately kept weak by systems that needed their gifts but feared their power. Think about it. Empaths can see through lies instantly. They can sense manipulation before it's fully formed. They can read the hidden dynamics that hold toxic systems together. If empaths were taught to trust and weaponize these abilities, they would be ungovernable. So society teaches them the opposite. It teaches them their gift is a disorder, that seeing clearly is paranoia, that strong boundaries are selfish, that saying no is cruel. Every message an empath receives from birth is designed to convince them that their power is actually their weakness. And most empaths never question this programming. They spend their entire lives apologizing for existing, dimming their light so others feel comfortable, sacrificing themselves on the altar of being acceptable. But the empaths who wake up, the ones who survive betrayal and integrate their shadow, they become something society can't control. They become sovereign beings who serve life on their own terms. They're no longer participants in dysfunctional systems. They're disruptors who reveal dysfunction just by refusing to enable it. And Jung believed this was evolution in action, that awakened empaths represent the next stage of human consciousness. Beings who can feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without becoming cynical, love deeply without losing themselves. This is why the world tries so hard to keep empaths asleep, because awakened empaths are dangerous to the status quo. They're dangerous to narcissists who need supply. They're dangerous to manipulators who need victims. They're dangerous to systems built on people not seeing clearly, not because they're cruel or destructive, but because they can no longer be used. So here's Jung's final insight about how empaths actually heal themselves. It's not about becoming less sensitive. It's not about building thicker skin. It's not about learning to care less. Healing happens when the empath realizes they were never broken. They were just unrefined. They were raw power without structure, pure perception without boundaries, complete compassion without discernment. They didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be forged. And the forging process is brutal. It requires betrayal painful enough to shatter every illusion. It requires solitude deep enough to remember your actual self. It requires shadow work, difficult enough to integrate your capacity for darkness. It requires selectivity radical enough to stop giving your gifts to people who don't deserve them. This isn't a gentle journey. This is a complete psychological death and rebirth. You don't heal from being an empath. You awaken into being an empath consciously. And once you awaken, you can never go back to sleep. You'll never again mistake people-pleasing for kindness. You'll never again confuse self-sacrifice with love. You'll never again believe that being harmless makes you good. You'll know that your power was always there, just waiting for you to claim it. You'll understand that you weren't a victim of your sensitivity. You were a warrior who hadn't learned to fight. The world told you that you were too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. But Jung's research reveals the truth. You were never too much. Everyone else was just not enough. Not enough consciousness to understand your gifts. Not enough capacity to handle your depth. Not enough courage to meet you at your level. So you dimmed yourself. You made yourself smaller. You pretended to be less than you were so others could feel adequate in your presence. But that version of you is dead now. The empath who apologized for existing. The empath who absorbed everyone's pain. The empath who gave everything and got nothing. That person died in the betrayal, in the clarity event, in the hermit phase, in the shadow integration. And what emerged from those ashes is someone the world has never seen before. An empath with boundaries. An empath with teeth. An empath who knows their worth and refuses to negotiate it. This is the awakened empath Jung spent his life studying. This is the transformation that terrified and fascinated him. This is the power that's been sleeping in you since birth, just waiting for the right catalyst to wake it up. You were never broken. You were never weak. You were never the problem. You were a dormant force that the world convinced you was a flaw. But now you know better. Now you see clearly. Now you understand what you actually are. You're not a victim of your sensitivity. You're a weapon waiting to be wielded. You're not damaged by your depth. You're dangerous because of it. You're not suffering from your empathy. You're sovereign through it. And the moment you realize this, the moment you integrate your shadow and claim your power, you become unstoppable. Not because you're cruel or cold, but because you're finally, completely, unapologetically yourself. And that self is exactly what this world needs more of. Empaths who know their worth. Empaths who trust their perceptions. Empaths who use their gifts strategically. Empaths who serve life consciously rather than sacrifice themselves unconsciously. Jung believed you were the future of human consciousness, the bridge between what we are and what we're becoming. And every empath who wakes up makes that future more possible. Jung's clinical observations revealed something else that validates the awakened empath's journey. He noticed that these transformed individuals didn't just change their own lives. They created ripple effects in every system they touched. Their families were forced to become healthier or reveal their toxicity. Their workplaces either evolved to accommodate authentic communication or exposed themselves as psychologically unsafe. Their friendships either deepened into genuine connection or dissolved into the superficial transactions they always were. The awakened empath becomes a catalyst for collective transformation simply by existing authentically. They don't preach or teach or force anyone to change. Their presence alone demands that everyone around them choose consciousness or chaos. This is what Jung meant when he said empaths were evolutionary pioneers. They're not just healing themselves. They're modeling a new way of being human that integrates feeling with thinking, compassion with boundaries, love with self-preservation. And here's what makes this so powerful in today's world. We're living in a time of collective awakening where more empaths are reaching their breaking points simultaneously. The old systems that relied on empaths staying asleep are collapsing. The manipulators who fed on unawakened empaths are finding their supply drying up. The toxic dynamics that once seemed permanent are revealing themselves as unsustainable. This isn't coincidence. This is evolution forcing humanity to either grow or die. So if you've been betrayed, if you're in your hermit phase, if you're integrating your shadow right now, understand this. You're not falling apart. You're becoming whole. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself. You're not broken. You're breaking through. This is the awakening Jung documented. This is the transformation that changes everything. This is your power finally coming online after a lifetime of dormancy. The world tried to convince you that your empathy was your weakness, but Jung's research proves the opposite. Your empathy is your superpower. Once you learn to wield it consciously, once you integrate your shadow, once you become selective about where you direct your gifts, you become the most powerful force in any room you enter, not through domination or manipulation, but through complete consciousness. You see everything, you feel everything, you understand everything, and now finally, you choose everything. This is how empaths heal themselves, not by becoming less empathic, but by becoming empathic with purpose, not by shutting down, but by waking up, not by building walls, but by becoming sovereign. You were never meant to be everyone's emotional support system. You were meant to be a conscious force that enhances life where you choose to direct it. If you've recognized yourself in this awakening process, write in the comments, "I am awake," because your transformation isn't just personal, it's evolutionary. Every empath who wakes up shifts the collective consciousness towards something more aware, more honest, more whole. Jung believed in you. Now it's time to believe in yourself. Subscribe for more insights into becoming the awakened empath Jung knew you could be. Because the world doesn't need more broken empaths. It needs more empaths who've learned to harness their power consciously. And that journey starts the moment you stop apologizing for existing and start claiming the warrior you've always been. You were never broken. You were just unrefined. And now, the refining is complete. In the Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get the Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.